Hi, my name is Zach Huffman, and this is another video in the Policy Brief video series where we go over the different positions that we laid out in the policy brief that was released on August 1st. So today we're going to start working on the critiques section of the brief, and we have two critiques specifically in this brief that are extremely in-depth. So today we're going to focus on the settler colonialism critique. Starting off, we have all the different critique shells that I have laid out here. So I have three different 1NC shells along with extensions of those shells, along with framework extensions of those shells along each. So anywhere you see right here where it says 1NC is the start of a new shell, and then the two kind of blocks below each of those are going to be full 2NC extensions, absent the link that you'll obviously insert yourself, and then framework along with that. So we have a generic settler colonialism critique shell, which is essentially arguing with the second-yang evidence that settler colonialism is kind of the ontological structure of all things that exist, specifically in the United States, and that everything that exists on this land kind of produces epistemological and ontological relations that further genocide. So this is essentially arguing that settler colonialism is the overarching structure of how things operate in the United States, and everything is kind of geared towards the genocide of indigenous populations. You'll insert the specific links that you want to read against that F, and then a generic alternative that is arguing for an ethic of incommensurability towards decolonization. This is essentially arguing that anything that is found as colonial or settler that supports settler colonialism in any way should be rejected in favor of kind of an ethic towards decolonization. So that means kind of relinquishing any desire to protect a colonial future and rejecting anything that protects that colonial future, which is essentially arguing the judge should kind of view the debate through the link debate. If the affirmative does link and cause any sort of furthering of colonial relationships, colonial knowledge, then the judge should reject that as an ethic of incommensurability. And then we have a piece of framework evidence that we've laid out in the 1NC, this piece of Thambonathan and Kinsella at 21 evidence that says that the knowledge that the affirmative produces genocidal subjectivities. So this is arguing that not just the plan, but all the different forms of knowledge around the plan. So this is like the cards that they read, the advantages they read. Maybe they have a card that says that economic growth is really good. Maybe they don't necessarily defend economic growth itself, but let's say they have a card that defends economic growth, and you could kind of link to that card and say that the knowledge surrounding the plan, the knowledge that they have presented, produces genocidal subjectivities. And that's a reason that the judge should kind of reject that toward an ethic of incommensurability. So then we have the extensions for that. I'm not going to go over all these specifically, but very in-depth extensions, and then some framework extensions as well that are really good. And then we have another kind of critique shell. This one's going to be focused on settler fascism. So similar to the regular settler colonialism critique, but this one is arguing that fascism is a specific element within settler colonialism, and that fascism is on the rise. So when I say fascism, think of things like white supremacist groups, think of things like the January 6th kind of riots that happened at the Capitol. Those are all fascist kind of movements, fascist ideologies that are kind of rising in the status quo. You're seeing a lot more of these groups get emboldened. You're seeing a lot of things like QAnon, stuff like that, that are kind of increasing in the status quo. And that's kind of the fascism that these pieces of evidence are talking about, right? So this is arguing that fascism is specifically driven by settler colonialism and the desire to kind of control the land that the settlers are on, and that includes kind of eliminating all Black and Native life that exists on that land as well, or kind of adapting it to fit within a white supremacist framework. So this Robinson evidence is making that argument that settlers are driven by white raisonnement, which is kind of always trying to control frontiers, is what the Robinson evidence is specifically arguing, and that this can only occur through native elimination and anti-Black violence. So then we have another section where we just kind of talk about inserting the links that are going to be good and specific to the affirmative, and then the alternative is a piece of Cassignate evidence 17 that kind of argues that the alternative should be a revolutionary kind of physical overthrow of the United States towards decolonization. So this is kind of arguing that people should rise up and revolt against the United States, burn down government buildings, things like that. Is kind of what this card is arguing, and that the ultimate goal of that revolution should be to give land back to, quote, the savage, and life itself back to the, quote, slave. So this is essentially arguing that natives should get their land back, and Black people should specifically get their form of life back that has been kind of written to be abjected and written into social death through the ontology of slavery. So this piece of evidence is arguing that revolution should ultimately see the goal of reversing those trends. And then the same piece of evidence we went over earlier about framework and how their knowledge produces genocidal subjectivity. So same case with the other regular one in C shell. You have extensions here that kind of outline specific things that are specific to this shell. So as you see, there's a piece of Shaw evidence that was not in the normal colonialism extension. This one is focused on the specific rise in fascism. This card is really good and kind of outlines all the different things that are occurring in the status quo. Once again, insert your own link extensions, impact extensions, framework extensions, alternative extensions, and then more on the framework stuff, right? And then finally, we have the settler capitalism critique shell. So this argument is kind of a combination of the settler colonialism critique and the capitalism critique, and argues that they exist kind of in tandem. So the Decide 21 evidence is arguing that settler colonialism is not just the conquest of land, but is also the conquest of labor to kind of work that land. So that kind of explains things like the plantation economies. That explains things like not necessarily the full elimination of native life, but the accumulation of native culture, the accumulation of Black culture in ways that kind of not just allow for the conquest of land, but allow for the conquest of subjectivities and allow for the conquest of labor, allow for the conquest of people that can further capitalist growth, right? So that's what this Decide piece of evidence is arguing. And then, obviously you'll still insert your links like you would in any other shell. And this specific piece of alternative evidence, it kind of has two pieces of evidence. This one says that settler capitalism should be organized against in every instance, otherwise extinction. So this is like the same author as the alternative, but it's arguing that you have to reject settler capitalism in all instances, which is kind of an alternative in itself when you think about it, and then otherwise extinction. So even if you don't necessarily win the alternative, which is the red deal, which we'll get onto in just a second, you could always argue that the judge should just reject anything that is producing settler capitalist logics or settler capitalist relationships. So that's kind of a cheaty way that you can get out of necessarily going for the alternative. And then finally, the alternative, the Red Nation 20 evidence that says that the alternative is the red deal. So this is a very specific outline of policy proposals that should be campaign for and then people should get elected and pass these policies. So this is kind of arguing for the creation of a party that is on more of a like communist oriented party that is specifically focused on not just producing like communist relations in the United States and a communist economy, but also by kind of relinquishing control back to native populations as sort of a reversal of colonial land relations. So this is very specific pieces of policy outlines in this. And then once again, the same piece of them and Nathan and Kinsella evidence. So this is just arguing that judges need to make sure that not just the plan, but the research that the AF produces is also anti-colonial. Same thing we had on the other shells, extensions with framework extensions. And then later on for like the 2NC and other related things, I always like this trick when I was debating with the Settler Colonialism Kritik, was arguing that status quo modernity is unsustainable, basically arguing that settler colonialism is going to cause extinction right now. So it's kind of try or die. So it's either you vote for the alternative to try to demolish settler colonialism or settler capitalism or settler fascism, whichever you go for. Otherwise, we're going to die anyways. So it's kind of a try or die scenario and a trick that you can go for. And then further on, we have tons of different links to things like extinction impacts. We have IPR links, AI links, green tech, growth, tons of things. We have links to specific KAPs that we have more down here as well. But we have links to like chaos, a generic link about how you have to do specific you have to politicize your demands, which chaos don't. So that's a good way to kind of link to chaos as well. And then we have app answers. So you have the generic framework that you always want to go for. It's Ks like this that argue that they have to prove specifically the plan and not just the things around the plan are bad. They have to prove that the plan is uniquely worse than the alternative or the status quo. So they have to have an alternative or they have to defend the status quo. There's no in between. Is kind of what this argument is saying. And then it impacts out into clash, which we have a piece of evidence here that impacts that out. And then some other pieces of evidence, decolonization bad. We have some stuff about like extinction rhetoric being good, climate rhetoric being good. You can answer capitalism bad by saying cap is good. That kind of answers the capitalism specific settler colonialism critique we have. We have answers to the government being bad. There's the climate dissent, which is always good against critiques, that says that pessimism against the political is bad. This doesn't work as well against the settler capitalism critique because it does politicize its demands, but the other two don't necessarily. So that's a good answer to those other two K shells. And then some generic alternative fail stuffs, movement co-option, and then internal fights. So yeah, some pretty good stuff here with the settler colonialism critique. Tons of stuff that you can utilize. I don't want to undersell how important some of this 2NC stuff is. You can see all the different arguments that are being bred here, that are literally kind of doing the 2NC for you as long as you increase the link extensions. And these link extensions are not short, as you can see. This is a good link extension, a good example. Like these are not. These are all either carded or they have long pieces of analytics. These are great pieces of impacted link extensions that you must utilize to be successful. So the best way to kind of utilize this critique, read your 1NC shell, and then in the block, just read this straight down and have your impact or have your link extensions ready that are already written for you down here. You just got to copy and paste them in. Reading this straight down is going to do everything you need to win a critique in the round. Now, obviously, you want to answer their specific arguments. You want to answer what the app is saying, but reading this straight down will do everything you need outside of that. So we really prepared this in a way that's going to prepare you best to go for the settler colonialism critique in a very, very effective way, in a very efficient way. And then the next video, we're going to go over the capitalism critique specifically, and it's set up in a very similar way. So we'll go on to that in the next video.